let's call the meeting to order then. Okay, so Happy New Year. Today is the January 3rd and call the Home Advisory Group to order. And go ahead with initial roll call.
Miranda Barfus, Don Bastian.
Here.
Cindy Cahill. Lori Chassie. Here. Michael Crandall. Lucy Evans.
Here.
Paula Garcia.
Here.
Patty Guston.
Here.
William Hennett.
Here.
Mark McLaughlin. Lynn LaPlante. Kalisha Page. James A.
How many?
We have six.
We have six. Okay. So we, the chair chooses members, and under the authority of the county board rules, which member we're going to? Shorzy will appointed to serve as temporary member of this committee to establish quorum.
So moved.
First, second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, for the Home Advisory Group, public comment.
We have no public comment for the Home Advisory.
Thank you. Approval of minutes of the regular meeting of Tuesday, November 1st, 2022. Second?
I'm sorry, we made the second.
Anyone make a second yet? Second. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thanks. Okay, we'll move on to the first of the action items.
This is Miranda. City
Oh, you made it.
Oh,
hi,
hi,
Miranda.
Hi, Miranda, how you doing?
Now we have.
Oh my
Okay.
It was that Naperville traffic, wasn't it?
Probably-
Okay,
Going good.
all set? Okay. The first action item is a recommendation for approval of the sale and assumption of terms, conditions, and responsibilities of a Home Investment Partnership Act agreement, project number HM09, HM9209, Maple Court between South Group LLC and Ogden Court Apartments LLC for a total amount of $1.1 million. So moved. First, second. Any discussion from staff? And if we
Do you want to maybe I'll answer my question.
Sure. So first, Happy New Year. I'm Dave McDermott. I know several of you are new, so I just wanted to take a minute and say Happy New Year and good morning. The reason we have two meetings back to back too, I want to clarify, it's because the city of Naperville participates in one of our HUD funds and not in the other funds. So we end up having two meetings that are structured back to back. If there's a really large item, we vote on it twice. So we'll only provide one explanation, but we need to vote on it twice. For this particular item, this is a property that's inside of our affordable housing portfolio. There's always two periods of time that we're looking at. One is the federally mandated affordability period, and the other is a continued use period, which county can, in this case, selected to add on beyond the affordability period. So this property has met the federal requirement for affordability period. We still have a $1.1 million forgivable loan on the property. It's a sale between two willing partners. It's the agreement from our perspective is if you maintain this as affordable housing, we'll approve the transfer. Otherwise, we could demand our money back. So these things come to the board once in a while. It's a matter of us vetting the application, vetting the financials of the purchasing party, and then approving the sale to go through. So in this case, we have no concerns about the sale going through to the partner. There's, I think, goes through 2034, the period of affordability period that we have on there, or the continued use period that we have on there. So the expectation will be that they maintain 20 units as affordable through 2034, and at that point, our loan will be forgiven.
The question I had, I think when it was under Maple Court, under the first South Group, it was 24 affordable units, and now it's going down to 20. Is that correct?
So that change actually happened when we did our last agenda item. It was structured based
The
on
last
how.
sale, not the last.
Correct, yeah, the
last
last
what?
sale.
When it was sold 2 years ago?
Yeah, I
Is
think
that
even
right?
less than that. I think it was about a year and a half ago. So they had met, when they met that affordability period, they had met the obligation for that additional 4 units. And our $1.1 million loan that's still was on the property only referenced those 20 units.
It only
So
so it's
those-
really not a change then at this point.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's what you know.
Yes.
So, and correct me if I'm wrong, so this transaction that's happening between these two parties in 2025, 2024, the $1.2 million loan will be washed away
In 2034.
in 2034. Okay.
So we have options, and sometimes it depends on the individual financing for the project, but we can do an amortizing loan where they pay a portion, or they do an end of the year payment. We can do a forgivable loan, where as long as they meet the requirements for that time period, then everything's forgiven at the end. We can sometimes do balloon loans. We don't like to do those as much, but that can sometimes be worked out if it makes sense with the financing. In this case, the original deal that was set up with the property when the original developer came to us for money was for a forgivable loan. And so the subsequent owners have just assumed that responsibility for that loan.
Okay. And so that date will never change. It won't be pushed out unless it's somehow renegotiated.
So in theory, they could come to this body and request forgiveness or an early release or something like that, but that would be up to you guys, and that would be,
And-
we like it because it's an affordable housing property in Naperville, which it's not a community that has a lot of affordable housing, so we obviously would like to keep it that way.
And then the 1.1 is coming from HUD and the federal government, not from the county itself, right?
Sure,
It's
yep.
coming
So
from
this would have all been,
some other program or approved HUD financing.
Right, so
All of the funding that's the purview of the Home Advisory Group and the Community Development Commission is funding that comes from HUD directly to the county, that we then administer under HUD's rules. And then there's, there's very specific HUD rules, and then there's some areas where we have the ability to go sort of above and beyond what HUD requires.
And so you've worked with HUD on this deal, is that correct?
well,
Because
so anytime we have an affordable housing project, we do a rolling application basis. So they come in here to this body first and ask for approval to go forward with the project. And that's typically where you'll get a sense of what the loans are and kind of what the financing is for the project. And so, I mean, the short answer is yes, we've met all the HUD requirements for this property. We'd like to keep it in that affordable housing portfolio through the end of 2034.
Is your question, did HUD sign off on this
full
this sale?
disclosure, my husband works for HUD. He's one of their legal counsel.
Oh, okay.
He supervises about 15 attorneys, and this is what they do, transactional work and enforcement.
Right.
And so I'm just wondering if that was something
So a lot of
that
that-
you guys. do
HUD
at
would
the
not
county
need,
level.
HUD would not need to sign off on this. This at this point, this is an agreement between the county and the owner of the current property. HUD is the financer up here that we have to answer to,
Right.
but they don't sign off on every single transaction we do. They come in from time to time and audit what we do. So it's unless if we have a project that's incredibly complex and we're doing things differently than we've done them before, or there's some nuance, we'll go to HUD for technical advisement and say, this is how we want to structure this deal. This is what we think we can do under your regulations. So we would do it from a prospective status. This is a pretty routine transaction, and it's basically saying, okay, we used to have an agreement with this developer. Now we're just picking that agreement up and putting it down on a different developer. Same property, same rules, same funding, nothing's changing. There's really no reason to go back to HUD. If HUD down the road is monitoring our home program, they may want to look at, but as long as it's maintaining its affordability, it continues to meet housing standards. We do go out and monitor. Another important component is we monitor these projects on an annual basis. So we'll go in, we'll look at the rent rolls, we'll look at the income verification for the tenants, we'll inspect the units. So that obligation is on us, and we have a regular presence in any housing development that we have funding in.
Perfect. Great, thank you.
Yeah, a lot of it's delegated authority for like they're delegating us as the county to be responsible for this set of
Perfect.
funding.
And I'm glad to know that you guys go in and evaluate the conditions and everything like that. So thank you. Thank you.
I have a question. So there's 20 units. What's the occupancy? Is it like big enough for a family of 5 or?
I don't have that off the top of my head. I think it's 1 and 2 bedrooms.
Yeah, they're probably 2 bedrooms.
Um,
This property was originally built, I'm one of the few who was around here in 1992. Or I wasn't here in 92, but I was here, been here long enough that I knew the original owner. And Maple Court was built very specifically for its accessibility. So a large percentage of the units are accessible. And I believe they're primarily 1 and 2 bedroom units.
Yeah, it's 15 out of the 20 that we have remaining are accessible units, so.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
And is that on Napier and Maple?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I see lots of kids at that bus stop every morning. It's nice that they have that.
Okay, any other questions or comment? Okay, this would be.
Voice vote.
Voice vote, okay.
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Next item is an action item, recommendation for approval of the substantial amendment 2 to the 2021 action plan, which is the 4th overall amendment for the allocation of home American Rescue Plan funds. And looking for a
So move.
second. Any staff comment relative to this item?
Yes, so first of all, thank you. This is exactly the kind of, we have typically more discussion at these meetings than some of the other meetings, so this is great. Please ask all the questions you want. I was gonna first just give a shout out to staff who did an awful lot of work on this. It kind of comes across as a short item with just 2 things, but it's, there's a lot of work that went into developing this plan. Special shout out to Julie Hamlin, who's our manager, and who led a lot of that. The American Rescue Plan was an enormous piece of legislation that had a lot of different funds that came through to the county in different areas. This is only referencing about $6.5 million that came through HUD for the home program, which is for affordable housing in the county. They specified some rules to make it targeted at kind of higher risk populations. So them who are literally homeless or at risk of homelessness or survivors of domestic violence or those fleeing domestic violence. At this point in this approval, we're only talking about category funding. So we looked at we did a survey, we looked at a lot, we had a lot of conversations with our continuum of care, we had a lot of preliminary research that went into our recommendations. We think the largest need is for affordable housing. We put about 85% of the funding towards affordable housing. But at this point, that's just a category project. So we don't have a specific project yet. So I don't want everyone to kind of like any future project would come before this body to get reviewed, we'll get a recommendation from this body. So but that's where we think the need is. So we put the largest percentage for affordable housing. We put a little bit of supportive services, anticipating needs with the new interim housing center that PADS operates in Downers Grove. So we anticipated some needs from them regarding supportive services for youth there. And then there's a little bit that we keep for our own administration. So we pay our own staff out of this if they're working on that project. I would say the data was kind of overwhelming in a sense in terms of the need of affordable housing. And so that's where we put the lion's share of it. The other thing I would just, it's a reality of the business of affordable housing is that we're only projecting this would potentially develop 15 units of affordable housing. So it's a very big issue with a lot of complexities and a lot of different things, but that's about what we think we can get for this. Again, will depend on what developers come forth with the project or what projects we're able to identify that meet all this criteria. But that today, the purpose of this is to make that recommendation that you go forward, submit this plan to HUD. HUD then reviews this plan. If everything looks okay, then they give us our full allotment of money, and then we're really on screen to look for projects, or we're working with developers. Projects, absolutely good.
Affordability, can you define affordability? Are you going by HUD's number of affordability calculations or IDA number of calculations, or are you doing an area specific calculation of your own?
So that's one of the challenges of affordable housing, right? There's 27 different definitions for it.
And everybody's got a different definition for affordable.
I would say even this particular fund really established its own rules. So it has to fall within this rules. Most of the population to be served is supposed to be less than 30% area median income. So that's the largest group this is supposed to serve. And then I think there are a certain amount of units that can be served to anyone 80% or below, just to kind of help with the financing of the project. But that's kind of so we generally, I would say we have to adhere to the HUD home rules. This is like the HUD home rules plus an additional regulations they put in specific to the ARP program.
And I think the difficulty too is also going to be that even construction and development costs have skyrocketed.
Absolutely.
And so the viability of the affordable number that's been calculated by region isn't really working, because the cost of all of that and the cost of taxes and everything like that will sway and skew how much development can actually get done under that affordability number. Right. So I'm not sure what the answer is. I know there's been some customized affordability by location that's been done in other areas. I don't know if the county has done that, but it might lend itself to getting developers in and developing product that will help people.
More than likely, these funds will be layered with some other sources of funding. But, you know, it could be low-income housing tax credit program from the state. It could be state home ARP money. Affordable housing is, all housing is extremely expensive to construct. And with land costs in DuPage County, it's even more expensive. So on a per unit cost, development, the per unit cost of development is very high. So it's highly likely that will be, you know, that will be gap financing or layering, or, you know, I mean, it is entirely possible that that a developer would want to do a small unit, so, you know, and then maybe partner with a social service organization and do permanent supportive housing. But it's an expensive business for sure.
I have a question. Who writes like the RFP for, we're looking for just kind of general affordable housing and it's up to whoever submits their proposal. But are there opportunities where we can state that, I would love to see the solar panels, if there's a new housing complex or something, solar panels to save them money on their electric bills, any kind of energy efficiency, windows, that all helps with the affordability for the tenants. Is there any opportunity to put that in there? Or is that outside of?
Doesn't
So I
our,
would say-
I'm sorry, doesn't our, I believe our current application has additional points for energy efficiency measures, don't they? I believe it already has. We have a very specific application criteria with a point system, and I'm pretty sure that we added that 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, I would say my other response to that would be, so we have sort of this rolling application, so anyone can apply at any time. If we ever identified a property and could release an RFP specific for that, we could write in a lot more of those kinds of questions in terms of what we're looking for a response. So that's another way of developing affordable housing. Historically, we've relied on the developer to identify a parcel and then propose us what they wanted to do with that parcel.
Right, but if the county had control of a property, for example, we could then go out and solicit developers and say, we have this much money, and these are the kinds of things that we'd like to see, and then it would be up to the developer to come back. But we'd have more of an opportunity to drive that because we could be offering that property at a discounted rate. So
Sure.
that's what Woodridge did probably 5 or 6 years ago with the senior housing development. They had a parcel of land adjacent to their city hall, and they did a solicitation for proposal for affordable senior housing, but they sold the land at a discounted rate to help with the affordability.
And I think we were working on that in South Naperville because we have a parcel there that the city owned. And they're focusing on seniors and adult disabilities, which is
Talk to that developer.
which
I
is a
think Dave has
really,
talked to
and that's in Will County though, and it's a real good blend. And hopefully that will transition, but it is a company coming in. And I'm wondering if, maybe to get more units is maybe to focus more on communities that have lower real estate taxes, because HUD's calculation includes real estate taxes, which then, changes the whole number system. But we could probably get more units if they're in areas that have lower real estate taxes, because they're all, they leave that in.
So that exact project will be, I expect them to come to this body with a request for $1.9 million in home funds. So they are outside of DuPage County, but they are within the city of Naperville, which means they're eligible for funds as part of our home advisory group. So I expect that's not on, we're not voting on that today, but I expect that item to come.
Just one more question on the clarification on, can some of the money that we're putting aside, because basically that's what we're doing with this money, right? Can it buy property if a piece of property were to come available?
I guess I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. We could, I guess the other thing we could always do relative to this money is change the plan. If something changes along the way, we can amend and so it's not like we're hard stuck into what this is.
Okay.
But I guess. I
Do you
don't know the
mean
answer to that
that
in
we
terms
would
of
purchase a property and then sort of bank it and
land bank
then
it as the county?
hold it as the county and then solicit for development
Correct.
proposals?
Correct.
I haven't looked at this in a really long time. I don't, in the past, that is possible. I think it depends on how long you plan to hold that property.
Okay.
You have to have the clear intent of developing it.
You almost have to have the developers kind of on the line.
Or maybe,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, we could certainly look into that. It's, you know, there's nothing that we could do quickly. Everything that we do is, you know, whatever we decide to do with this money, it's gonna have to have a public hearing and we'll have to do an
And
amendment.
this has to be spent by, is this also the upfront?
2030, no, this is 2030.
This one's 9
Yeah,
years.
yeah,
All right, good.
yeah.
To Paula's point, do we have a list of county-owned land that is currently out there?
I have had several discussions with Public Works about that. So that is an option. We've talked about what is out there. That's, I guess, what do I say? That's, some of that is up to you guys more than it's up to me, right? But that's an option that's out there in terms of what's county controlled and what's it currently being used at and what's a potential development. There's lots of zoning issues that get involved or, you know, there's a lot that goes into it, but that's certainly an option.
Okay, any final questions, comments? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. Third one is an action item recommendation for approval of the FY 2023 Community Development Block Grant CDBG Emergency Shelters Grant ESG and Home Investment Partnership SAG Home application funding recommendations.
So moved. Second.
And we have first and second, and Dave, you want to go through?
Sure. So again, this is another big item. So that's kind of why we're taking more conversation today. This is another big item relative to our overall operations. We do things in HUD on a 5-year cycle. This is year 4. This is proposing the projects we'd like to accomplish in year 4. So I always stress we do competitive applications. So we go out with open applications and people can tell us what projects they want to do. We do a mix of construction, street, sewers, water main type projects. We can do some nonprofit capital improvements. So if like for example, there's an agency that wants to acquire a new group home, we can do those projects. And then we have a category called public services, which basically pays for salaries and benefits of staff at nonprofit agencies. So in those 3 buckets, the first 2 buckets that have already been scored and reviewed, like those are all projects that have been already brought before this board. We have recommendations. The biggest change that we saw was we did see a decrease in funding in CDBG last year. And so that happens at a federal level. We get the money comes down there. It was less than we anticipated. It was around 3.6. We were thinking it would be closer to 4. That has meant we have 1 less project in our plan for 2023 than we thought of, 1 less municipal project. And then you'll sort of see we have a bunch grouped in 2024. You know, if funding doesn't change, there's not a way we're going to accomplish all of those projects, but we have them all in there in case a project falls through or something changes. We want to have that in the list. We always look at readiness, score, and then, you know, because of the time period between when they applied for the project and when they're actually going to do the project, we just want to make sure that nothing's changed. The items that were scored and reviewed for this relate to that smaller chunk of money, that 15% of public service money that goes to salaries and benefits. So we got 10 applications for that relative to CDBG. We scored them all, staff looked through them all and score them all. Two people score, and then we look at the combined average. And we took forth the top 6 as recommendations. So we just scored them and brought forth the top 6. And then ESG is the other category. So again, throwing out a lot of acronyms. Home is affordable housing. CDBG is community development block grant. ESG is emergency solutions grant. Think of that as homeless services. We had, I think, a total of 6 applications for ESG, and we made our recommendations on that. The only thing that I would say for that one, we did not. We also considered HUD as the largest provider of these services, and so some of our funding recommendations were adjusted slightly relative to their size. So Catholic Charity scored higher. They operate an 18-bed facility. HUD operates a 135-bed facility. we felt like their needs justified a higher award amount for their population, even though they didn't score as high. So we kind of adjusted the numbers based off of that. So what we're really reviewing today is kind of our slotting of capital projects. So the projects that are put forth would likely be completed even next year. So this is another challenge that we have, is that HUD doesn't always give us the money right away. Our new HUD year starts April 1st, but sometimes we don't get the money until August or September, which means we can't move the project till the next year. We're kind of always working a year behind in some ways. But our recommendations are really about the slotting for 2023, what are going to be our 2023 projects, and then the scoring and recommendations related to that public service and the ESG fund, which are two smaller chunks, but important. All in the category, because even our CDBG public service are all in the category of homeless services or homeless support. So that's a lot of information. This is a big item. I'm going to pause for a minute and see if there's any questions right away, but we were a little, this is we have a lot of new members. These are some of our bigger items of the year, so I try to put more explanation into the memos. Yeah, absolutely. We have one in the back. Sure.
So I just heard you say that there was a reduction in funding
Yes.
was that for the CDBG? CDBG. So, and it went from, what was the amount?
Roughly 3.9 to 3.6.
It's a little bit reduction. Okay.
Now they have passed a federal budget for this year, but it takes us a little while before we see what the CDBG number is going to be like. They have to do all that formula work at the federal level, and then eventually we'll get our number. But they have a federal budget passed.
Okay. So as we're crafting our federal legislative agenda, maybe we add this in there to fully fund.
I think we typically include, funding of CDBG and home in our federal platform. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other comment?
I just want to echo what Dave said at the onset of both the previous item and this item reflects just an extraordinary amount of work by Julie Hamlin and her staff, by Dave, by Marge, like the whole community development unit. The home ARP plan was about 1.5 years of work, huge amounts of consultation with organizations out in the community. They just did a really great job, and I just want to make sure that I acknowledge like the enormous amount of work that goes into putting these plans together. And now they actually have to do the projects, but but these planning pieces are just enormous. So I just want to thank them if they're watching. Thanks.
So the work's not ending, it's starting.
That's right. Right.
Yes.
Okay, any other comment? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Any other business? Okay, and then adjournment. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks. And our next meeting date for the home group will be on February 7th, 2023. Okay, switching gears. There it is. Give me a second.
I think can we do a visual roll? It's all the same people who were at the last meeting. Can she do a visual roll, or does she have to call roll call? Okay.
Okay, well, we'll call the CDC Executive Committee meeting to order for January 3rd. And let's see, let's go ahead and do that roll call.
Don Bastian,
Here.
Cindy Cahill, Lori Chassie. Here. Michael Crandall, Lucy Evans.
Here.
Paula Garcia.
Here.
Patty Guston.
Here.
William Henneth,
Here.
Mark McLaughlin, Lynn LaPlante, Felicia Page, James A. Six, we have six. We need-
We're good, right?
Well, six.
Oh, that's right. We put members towards me.
Okay,
That's right.
under the authority of board rules, that would serve as temporary member of the committee to establish a quorum.
So moved.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Welcome back aboard. Okay, thanks. Public comment. We actually do have a comment that we'd like to read.
Okay, this is meeting date of 1/3/23. Community Development Commission is the meeting. It's from Jim Happenstall with United Cerebral Palsy Segment of Greater Chicago. Their address is 3100 South Central Avenue, Cicero, Illinois, 60804. Daytime phone, 708-638-5946. Comment type, provide testimony/public comment. Subject, 2023 and 2024 proposed CDBG construction projects, CDC recommendations. On behalf of UCP Segment of Greater Chicago, I extend our deep gratitude to the DuPage County CDC Executive Committee for its longstanding support of our many capital initiatives to benefit residents of DuPage County with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Your most recent proposed plans includes $596,150 in funding for our Home is Where the Heart Is group home project under the heading recommended for funding but to be scheduled. We are especially thankful for the significant funding for this crucial project, which has been included in your public facilities recommendations for year 5, which is 2024. Should the opportunity arise, we hope the CDC would consider advancing this project to a nearer term start date, enabling UCP Segment to address the major need among people with IDD for critical residential housing and services. On behalf of UCP Segment, I thank you for the chance to offer this public comment. All the best, Jim Happenstall, Vice President of Institutional Giving.
Any no other public comment? Okay, great. Then we'll move on to the approval of the minutes of the CDC Executive Committee for Tuesday, November 1st, 2022.
So moved.
Good. First,
Second.
second, all in favor?
Aye.
Thanks. Next item is fiscal year 2023 application scoring appeal.
And I did not receive any requests for appeal.
Okay, thank you. So we'll now move on to the committee votes. First action item, recommendation for approval of a second modification to a community development block grant CDBG agreement with DuPage Care Center, water heater and south wing windows, project number CD 2106, increasing the funding by $400,297 for a total award amount of $1,200,297.
Second.
Got a first and a second. Staff comment?
2 notes on this. If you were on Human Services this morning, this looks familiar. Occasionally, procedurally, we'll kind of reverse the order to buy us an extra 2 weeks of time. In this case, we have a big spending test that comes at the end of January. So flipping the dates and having them both approved today helps us as we try to make that spending deadline. And then the Care Center, the last couple of years has had a set aside of funding that's available to them. They had a couple projects that came in under budget. They asked if they could take the balance and put it onto this new project. What it's going to actually look like for them is more windows they're able to include in the project as part of their window replacement. So because they sort of had that set aside funding, it made sense to us that yes, they should just be able to take the money from one. We don't normally, or we don't necessarily do that with all of our partners, but the Care Center kind of has a block of money that's set aside for them. So both this item and the next item are related to that, one coming in under, taking that excess money and putting it towards the Windows project.
So they have to be approved by both committees to go forward? Okay.
Yeah, the way things work here for CDC and Home is the Community Development Commission and Home Advisory Group serve as advisory committees to the county board. The CDC and Home Advisory create the policies by which we administer our HUD funding. So they create the policies, they recommend the projects, but the actual agreements are between just the county and the individual recipient. So the CDC and Home Advisory are comprised equally of county board members and municipal members.
Okay, and then the Human Services.
Human Services is then the parent committee.
Oh, okay.
That actually approves or recommends the agreements. So you'll see there will be some things, if you continue on CDC and Home Advisory, there will be some things that will just stay at this level because they're policy. But anything that's related to an agreement will advance up through the county board process.
Okay, any other comment? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Next item, nearly identical to what we just talked about. Action item, recommendation for approval of a second modification to a community development block grant CDBG agreement with DuPage Care Center Air Handling Units, project number CD 2115, reducing the funding by $341,150 for a total award amount of $658,842.
So move, Guston.
Second. Okay, so we have a first and second. You covered a lot of that. Do you have anything else to add?
No additional comment.
Okay, any comment from members? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thanks. Next action item, recommendation for approval of the substantial amendment 2 to the 2021 action plan. Fourth overall amendment for allocation of home American Rescue Plan funds, home ARP item.
So move.
Second.
Got a first and a second, similar to what we just talked about in our home meeting. Do you have
No
anything
additional
else to
comment.
add? Any comments from the group? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thanks. And fourth, recommendation for approval of a fiscal year 2023 community development block grant CBG, emergency shelters grant ESG, and home investment partnerships act home application funding recommendations.
Motion, Guston.
Second.
Okay, we have a first and second. You want to add anything?
I do have one on this. I just looked at my notes. I should make a note of this. So we had one applicant, DuPage Pads, who did not meet the 10-day requirement for providing notice for their public hearing. They only provided 8 days. That sounds probably a little bit like splitting hairs, but that's technically they did not meet that requirement. So we should request a waiver of that policy for the purposes of including their application funding. We're going to make them go back anyway and do a 10-day notice, but I would like to request a roll call vote. All the other comments from the first meeting would stand, but that's something I should have noted. And so because it's a policy waiver, it would be a roll call vote, and that's a final decision that this body has. Yes.
Is that a legal requirement only because public hearings, when we do public hearings, you've got to give legal notice to the public and then a certain amount of time.
So I would say there are, placed on us, there are federal requirements regarding public hearings. This is a policy decision we placed on our applicants. And so this body can waive that policy requirement.
Okay.
So we require organizations to have a public hearing before they apply to us. If we approve the application, we approve the project, there will then be another public hearing. That's the federally required public hearing is our public hearing announcing our selected projects. There is no federal requirement on our subrecipient to have a public hearing. That's a local requirement.
So are we setting any precedents for our policy being waived? Like, you know, if one does it, then it's like, oh, let's excuse that one too. I mean, I hope not, but you know, potentially.
Anytime we're waiving a local policy, we're doing that. We're doing it on a limited basis on a one-time. It's not a blanket. If there was an organization that, I think this was just a mix up with the number of calendar days or something, right? If there was an organization that said, we didn't bother, we know you guys will waive it, like that's a whole different story. So we will from time to time request a waiver if there is, we have, we try to be very regimented in terms of following our policies and procedures. We also don't want to be, bureaucrats. And so if we don't want to toss out a really important project based on a technicality, particularly if that's a local, if it was a federal requirement, be out of luck. But we will take things on a case-by-case basis and say, can we just waive our local policy?
And I agree with that. I'm wondering, why do we have 10 days then? Who is the public or who is supposed to
What's
be
the notice for?
providing? Yeah, why do the notice at all? What is it? You know what I'm saying? Like, why did you put the policy in place? I guess I should ask.
Well, it would have been certainly in place before me, but I think the idea was to make sure that they're having the same level of citizen participation that we're putting on ourselves in some way, like that they're interacting with their public. What's happened in this situation, or what happened with these meetings, is some of them combine and then present their projects together and do one public hearing that addresses several things. I mean, we can certainly always look at policies and look at why that recommendation is in place. I
think you'd have to talk to the guy who was the director in 1973.
Yeah, I didn't know if there was some legal,
Yeah, no, it's
there's
been,
some legal
yeah.
thing or whatever, but yeah.
it has been a long-standing local policy.
So this was just a notice for a public hearing, right? That was the only thing. Okay, it wasn't like a notice for, we're about to break ground on something.
No.
Okay.
No, it was a notice of a public hearing of their intent to apply for funds.
That was
Okay.
2 days late, basically.
Okay.
So is our vote, which a roll call vote was requested, right? Is our vote to approve this item including waiving, or do we need to?
So I wrote the
We have 2 votes.
You could amend the motion that's currently on the table to include waiving the 10-day public hearing policy.
I would make that motion.
Who made the original motion? Who was?
Patty.
Dustin?
Yeah, I'd
So
like
she
to
needs-
separate it out, actually. I think
Okay.
it'll be
We could
clearer
do
for the
that.
public, if that's okay. We could do 2 motions.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine.
With the first motion being a roll call and the second one being,
Well, there's currently a motion to approve it on the table.
Okay,
So
that could
Okay.
just be a voice vote and
That
then
can-
do
that could be a voice vote and then,
a roll call on the waiver request.
right,
Doesn't matter which order.
Maybe the waiver
State
request should go
attorney?
So
first.
I'll make the motion to
Waive.
waive the timeline from 10 days to 8 days. And
So we have to vote on the first thing.
yeah, I don't know.
I think you would need to withdraw the
Attorney
first
here.
motion. So,
Probably need
I
to.
think
call
it should have been done in the other order. I think the policy should have been waived. and then-
That's where we're,
Yeah.
that was the
Right, so I
most
guess we
recent.
need to withdraw.
So we gotta
Yeah, so withdraw the
Withdraw
first
the motion.
motion,
Your motion, so we can vote on the waiver and then
Yeah.
vote on the.
then,
You have it back.
yeah.
There you go. I withdraw my motion
Okay.
and submit a motion to waive the waiver
Timeline.
of timeline for public
I'll
public
second.
hearing or whatever it was.
Thank you all.
Need a second?
I seconded.
Okay, Greg
That
second.
would be
okay, we got a first, second, and this one will be a roll call. You got
okay,
that?
Justice.
Okay.
With the
Yeah.
big motion.
okay. Patty Dustin,
No,
okay, Greg Schwarzy,
Yes.
Don Bastian,
Yes.
Lori Chassie,
Yes.
Lucy Evans,
Yes.
Paula Garcia,
Aye.
William Henneth.
Yes.
I believe I got everybody.
Okay. Do you
And
want to
make a
reintroduce the,
make a motion to recommend the approval of the YF 2023 Community Development Block Grant, Emergency Solutions Grant, and Home Investment Partnership Act application funding recommendations. Okay?
As amended.
Mm-mm,
Yeah,
no, it's not
there's
amended.
no amendment. It says written.
That was.
The amendment was
I'll
just for the
second
waiver.
that.
But you could second it.
I just
She
did.
did.
so we got a first and second, and all in favor?
Yes.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. Any other business?
Just thank you for working on through that
Thank
with
you.
us.
No,
Yeah,
thank you
for all
for all
the
your
hard
hard
work,
work. Yeah, it's great.
Thank you all the
Okay.
staff.
Looking for a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks. And our next meeting will be on February 7th.